Hi, I'm Tony from Humpop Gaming. Today we're going to take a look at how to create a smooth teleporter. And what we're going to do is make sure that this can be reusable across multiple games. Let's get started. So we're going to start with a blank code base, and the first thing we're going to need is a couple of models that are going to be our teleporters. So I'll come here to the toolbox and type in teleporter. And here we can select our teleporter. Notice that it does come with 5 scripts. We're not going to want these, so we'll accept it, and it's created a folder in our Explorer. If we come in here, we can see we've got Portal 1, Portal 2, got some credits. So these have been created by these guys. I'm going to delete these now, and I'll find the other scripts, one in here, and get rid of that. And there'll be another one there. Just a quick check to make sure there's no other scripts involved. And we're good to get started. But before we do, I'm just going to remove the space from this folder. And that's just a personal preference. It's not something that's needed, but I like to have it that way. So the next thing we want to do is move our models off our spawn plate, turn on collision, and move it so it's touching the ground. I'll then take Portal 2, so we can actually see the effect of our teleporter, and we'll change Portal 2 to be destination. So I can press F2 to change the name of this. We can leave Portal 1 as it is, and what we'll do is just take a look at the way this has been built. So we can see here we've got a teleport part, and that part is the bit that we want the script to be attached to. So when a user touches it, it triggers our teleport functionality. So what we're going to do is add a script in here, and I'll increase the size of this. Now what I'm going to be doing, guys, is copying some code over which I've previously created, because I can't type and talk at the same time. So for me to be able to explain what I'm doing, it's much easier to copy this stuff over. But I am going to explain everything that I copy in. I'm not just going to dump it there and expect you to understand it. So what we've got here, we've defined a variable called teleport trigger, and that's just referencing the parent part of this script. We then also want another variable called destination part. And what's happening here is we're accessing the workspace, which is where our models are. We're then waiting for this folder to be loaded in. Then we know once this folder's loaded in, our destination model will also be loaded in. So we just call destination there, and we assign that to our variable. We then want to access the teleport triggers touched event and connect to that. In here, we want to add a function. Let's spell it right. I still can't spell. This is what happens when I try to type and talk. So we have our touched event, and when a part gets touched, you get access to the object that touched it. This parameter is now referred to as hit for us. And what we're interested in is when a character has hit this part, we want to do something. If it's any other scenario, we don't want our code to do anything. So what I'm going to do is check the thing that's hit this teleport trigger, or rather the thing that touched this teleport trigger. I'm going to check the parent. If I put a breakpoint on here, press play, and get our character to run into it, we can see that the thing that touched the teleport trigger is the right lower arm. Now, you can't always guarantee it's going to be this. It could be the left arm, it could be the body, the head, the leg, the foot. But in this case, it was the lower arm. Now, parent of any of those parts, we can come down here and we can see the parent is Humpop Studio. That's me. That's my character. So I can assign this character to the variable which we've created. And if we just look at what this parent has, it has a bunch of 23 children. There's the root part, and then there's all the other parts that go up to make our character. Now, it could be any of these that hit it. But it quite easily could be not this at all. So in your game, you might have, I don't know, you might have bullets or explosions or something like that. They could hit this part, so we have to allow for that. So what we do here is we check, we'll get rid of that debounce that'll come in later. I'll just zoom out, let me get rid of that, can get rid of that as well. And I suppose we don't even need this explorer. There you go, you can see even more of the code now, which is what we're here for. So what we're saying here, if the parent doesn't have any sort of value, so if it's nil, then we're just going to return. It won't even run this next part. But if the parent did have a value, then what we're going to do is check all its children, and we're going to find the first child that's a humanoid root part. If we don't find it, so if not humanoid root part, then we're just going to return, we're not going to do anything else. So this style of coding is known as defensive coding. What you'll see some people doing is checking if it's a character and it has a humanoid root part, and then putting the code inside the if block. But I don't like that, because then you can get lots of if statements inside of if statements. This way, it keeps my code easier to read, or at least I think it does anyway. Let's get rid of this breakpoint. And then what we can say is, we can get our character, because we've got past this point now, so we know we've got a character to work with. And we can call humanoid root part. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to try and type again. I'm going to copy this, paste it in and explain. So we get our character. We get the humanoid root part, which we know we can access because this came back as true, which was why it didn't go in here. And then we can get the C frame, which is a property of the humanoid root part. We then assign the humanoid root part C frame to a new C frame, which is equal to our destination part. So if we come up here, and we can see up here our destination part is teleportation portals, which is this folder, destination, which is this model. Then in here, destination part doesn't currently have an out part. So what we're going to do is create an out part. So in here, I'm going to create a new part, call it out. And this is going to be the location where the character gets placed once the teleportation has been completed. So we'll move this up here, move it across, and now we'll place it just in front of the teleporter. Going to scale it down so it's flat, scale it out. I suppose I could have just rotated it and flattened it, but still, we get the idea. This is our part where we're going to teleport to, and we've named it out. So if we look in our script, we now have destination. Maybe you shouldn't call it part, just call it destination, but we'll leave that as it is. Then we're going to get the out part, which is this, and we're going to access the position property. So if we come and look at here, there's a bunch of properties on our part, and one of these properties is position. So now if you run that, we hit our teleporter and we're transferred over to the destination. Now this seems to work fairly well, but there is a problem with the script. And the way we can see that problem is if I draw this touched event, if I print touch to the console, when we hit this, we can see touch is triggered 15 times, which means this gets triggered 15 times, which means this is happening 15 times. While it's not a big thing for this demonstration, it's something that would have an impact on your game. So we want to get rid of that issue. And the easiest way to get rid of that is with a debouncer. So we're going to add a new debounce variable. And I probably should explain why it happens. So I'll stick a breakpoint in here. Let's run it so we can see why it happens. So I come to here, and this time we've got the right hand as hit. Run it again. This time it's the right foot. And because I was pausing it to debug, it's not going to hit as often. But if I stop this and I do a print hit.name, get rid of the debugger, increase this, what we actually see is the right handle, the right hand, the handle, upper torso, all of these parts hit it. So some parts hit it twice. And we don't need that. We just need whatever the first thing is to hit our part, and then we can work with that. So bringing in the debouncer is going to allow us to stop the script from executing a second time when we don't want it to. We can then get it to execute more once we've finished with this particular hit part. So what we're going to do in here is we have set our debouncer to false, and the first thing we're going to say is, let's change that to debounce. If the debounce is true, then return don't do any more with this script. But if it is false, then it's going to continue and execute this script. And the first thing we'll want to do before we continue executing is turn it to true. So now when the next part hits, debounce is true. So we'll return any other hits without doing anything. And our debounce can continue, and then our code can continue executing without any problems. But what we also want to do is at the very end, set our debounce to false. Now, I've put a task.wait in here for half a second. You don't really need to do this, but it'll become apparent later on in the tutorial as to why I've done this. So if I now print hit.name, we're only going to see one item that gets logged to the console, and that was the right hand. If we do it again, the left hand. Now we've got a bug there, and that is he's landed on the part and fell over. It's not something we want in our game. So what we can do is, the problem here is that we've got our humanoid root part C frame set to a new C frame, which is just equal to whatever the position of our out part is. So I'll just pin this here so you can remember this is our destination model, this is our out part, and that's what we're setting our humanoid's new position to. However, what's happening is our character's hitting the part that it's meant to be landing on top of, and then he's just falling over. So a better way to do this, or rather a way which won't cause any bugs, I'll leave this one in for now, just so you can see the difference between the two. Got humanoid root part, so character. Now let me just collapse the Explorer so I can see more of what's on screen. Bring this onto a new line. I'll bring this onto a new line. So what's happening now is our character's humanoid root part C frame is being set just like we did before. But this time we're going to create a new C frame using the character position, then times in that by, which will give us an X, Y, and Z value, and then times that by our X to be times by 0 and our Z to be times by 0. But the height, the Y, which is the height property, is going to be divided by the height of the player, or rather the character, which means he'll always land perfectly on that part. So if we run that this time it doesn't work. Why not? Yes, we've got another bug here. So what happened is we introduced a debounce, And we said if the debounce is false, we'll continue to execute the script, but we'll set the debounce to true. And then we've said return if this is not a character, or if the character doesn't have a humanoid root part. And that's what's happened. Something hit our part, the character was nil, or there was no humanoid root part, and it returned, which means the debounce has stayed as true. So what we need to do here is, if we're returning, we need to make sure our debounce is false. And we'll come in here, the right hand hit it, and now I'm just spawning back in the same place. So I've introduced another bug with this, and that's because I'm taking my character's humanoid root part and putting it back in the same position, where actually what I wanted was the destination. So I'll take this, do that. So what we've done is we've got the destination parts position, and then we're timesing that by a new C-frame using the Y position of the character, sorry, the Y-axis of the character, dividing that by 2 so they always land on top of the out part. Hopefully this one will work. And there we go. So it's not falling over anymore. If something else, if a different part is hitting our teleporter first, it still executes properly, which means I can now remove this, zoom out a bit, close this again. Don't know why it keeps opening. We'll get rid of this. And now we've got a working teleporter. So what we need to do now is convert that into something which we can reuse in different projects. So now we need to convert that so it's something that we can reuse across different projects. So I'm going to open the Explorer, going to collapse all this, and I'm going to go to replicated storage, create a new, I don't want a remote event, create a module script. What we're going to do, we'll call this teleporter. And in here, we're going to create a new teleportation instance. So the calling script, which is the one we've been working on so far, is going to require this module and create a new instance of teleportation and create a new instance of the teleporter. In doing so, it's going to have a fade duration, and this is what we're going to be using to give it that smooth look, where currently, as you saw, it was a little bit clunky when it jumps from one to the next. And we're going to smooth that out. And that's what this fade duration is for. So next, we're going to create a function that the caller is going to call, which is teleport. And here, they're going to pass a character in and a destination. So in this script, we're just hard coding the destination, which is the destination part out part. But here, we're asking them to pass it in because we want this to be reusable. So now the first thing we want to do inside this method is check that a character or a destination was passed and add a warning to the console if one was not passed. The reason why I'm doing this is to be kind to myself in the next 6 months or whenever I use it, where I might just call teleport and not pass in the right parameters. And during development time, I want to have a quick and easy way to identify what the problem is. So by adding this with a warning that's helpful, it can help me speed up my development time. So here I check to make sure that my function can continue to work. And if it can't, I can quickly identify the problem and I can get on with doing what I need to do. So then the next stage is to get the humanoid root part from my character. And then what I want to do is take this, and what we can say here is we'll tidy this up a little bit. Humanoid root part. And what would be passing, this destination would actually be passed in as destination out. So we're taking the destination position, and that so far has replicated this functionality. We're still going to need to put some functionality in to fade the screen in and out and make it smoother. But what I want to do before I do that is check to make sure this works. So to do that, I'm going to need to require the teleportation module, and I'm going to create a new instance of it. Then here I'm going to get rid of this functionality. Then I'm going to then I'm going to call teleporter, which is the new instance which we created here. So now we have access to this teleporter module. Then I'm going to call teleporter and pass in my character, which I've retrieved here, and then the destination part, which I want the character to travel to. So now if I press play, run into here, we get an error. So teleporter.teleport doesn't exist. It clearly does. So I'm going to have to stop this. So if we look in here, what the problem is, we've got, is it teleport? It's spelt correctly. If I look at teleporter, it's only got a fade duration in there. Oh, I see the problem. So I'll collapse this, come back to the teleporter. And what I forgot to do was assign the index. So this index property is really important when you're doing Lua development. This is what enables the computer to identify what methods are part of this teleportation class. So it uses the index to do the lookup based on the value which you've called. So I can remove that breakpoint now, run into here, and we've now got our working code again. But it's still looking meh, and we need to improve that. We want a good, smooth player experience. If the players aren't feeling happy, if they feel something's a bit rubbish in our game, they quickly leave. So let's get that fixed. So to fix this, we're going to create a fade screen. Now this fade screen doesn't need to be accessible outside of our teleportation module. This is purely an internal piece of functionality. So we make this local so it can't be accessed by calling scripts. But what we do, we pass in self. That way it's going to have access to the fade duration. Now what I'll do is I'll define the data types that we're passing in. So this is going to be our player, and this is going to be a Boolean. And I'll rename this to is fading. So this fade screen is going to control whether the screen is fading in or fading out to allow for that smooth transition from one place to the next. So next, what I need to do is create a fade screen. Now, what you could do is come down here to start a GUI, add a new screen GUI, then come into the screen GUI and add a frame. The problem with that is I can't just then use this code by just pulling it in. I then have other stuff which I need to do. So what I want to do is replicate this same functionality, but by doing it through code. So what I'm going to do is add a new module script, which is a child of the teleporter, and we'll call this teleporter GUI factory. We'll rename our module here. Then what I'll do here is create our function, and this is just teleporter GUI factory create. So what we're going to do is, notice here, we're expecting a player to be passed through. And what we do, the first thing we look for is the player's GUI. And if that doesn't exist, we're just going to return, we're going to stop the script executing. But if it does exist, we're going to define a new variable called fade GUI, and this will be a screen GUI. We'll give it its name, say reset on spawn false. We assign the parent to be the player GUI, which is the GUI that belongs to that player that's been passed in. And we ignore the GUI inset. The GUI inset is the default button bar at the top of your Roblox game, and by ignoring it, it just overlaps that so you don't get to see it. Then our next thing we're going to do is create a frame. We give that a name, we set its scale to be whatever the width is, and we set its scale to be whatever the height is. So whatever the width of the screen and whatever the height of the screen is, it's just going to fill it. We then set it to a black color. We set the background transparency to 1, and we set the parent to be this fade GUI. So like I showed you earlier, that's the same as coming in here, creating a screen GUI, naming it teleport fade GUI, and creating a frame, naming it fade frame. but we're just doing it with code so we can reuse this package easier. But the problem with this, let's get rid of all of these so we can see the code. The problem with this is every time this gets called, a new screen GUI, a new teleport fade GUI is going to be added, and we don't want that. The way we can get around that is checking to see if this teleport fade GUI exists. So we're going to say, look in the player GUI and find the first child called teleport fade GUI. Then if that doesn't exist, this will be nil. So we can then create a fade GUI and assign it to this fade GUI variable which we've created. Once we've done all of that, we then want to get the fade GUI and return the frame. So this is now creating us a screen which will be able to fade in and out when the player touches our teleporter. So if we go back to our teleportation module, and what we can do is require our factory. So I'll open the Explorer so we can see that here. So the child of teleporter is a factory. So we can require that there, and we can say, this is our fade frame. We also is going to need the tween service, because what we're going to do is fade something in and out. And one of the best ways to do that is with the tween service. The tween service is something that's provided by Roblox to make moving things and changing properties of things a lot easier. It's good for animations. But the tween service does require some information before you can use it. So you need to configure it to say how long you want your fade duration to be, which is why we set this up here, fade duration to be half a second. Then we'll want to say what its easing style is and its easing direction is. Next, we need to say, let's change this to is fading. So we need to say what the goal is going to be. So the goal is talking about which property of this frame are we targeting. We're targeting the background transparency property. So if I just create this screen GUI again, add a frame to it, and we open the properties here, you can see here there's a background transparency. And what I'm saying is, if is fade in is true, then the background transparency property is going to be set to 1, but if it's false, it's going to be set to 0. So let's get rid of these again. That'll be the last time I create the screen GUI. So our background transparency goal will be either 1 or 0, depending on the value of is fade in. Then we create our tween, we play it, and then we pause the code until the animation is completed. So what we need now for this to work is we need to call it. And to call it, all we have to do is say, before we move our humanoid, we want to fade our screen in. So remember, if it's false, background transparency is 0, which means you see it. It's not transparent. But we do require a player at this point. So what we can say here is we're going to use our character and we're going to use the player's service. So this is something, again, that's provided by Roblox, and it allows us to get the player from your character. So if there is no character, then this will be nil, which would cause the rest of your script to fail. But here, by the time we've got to this point, we are going to have a character, which means our player will be true, which means the rest of this can assume that the player is that the player exists. So we can fade our screen in, we move our character, then we can fade our screen out. Now we've already called the teleport functionality. So if we press play, we have a nice fade as the players moved to the new location. So that's everything I've got for the reusable teleporter. If you found it useful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. And I'll see you next time.